آزادی بیان
言论自由
free speech.
Let me just in conclusion ask you about one other area, because I know you've done a lot of work on anonymity, which is one of the most disputed areas online, at once essential and dangerous. Essential for the dissident, extremely dangerous because it can be used by the paedophile. Is there anything that you can say on the basis of this major research project you've been doing on anonymity?
Well, the part of the problem that we have looked at just now is the role of anonymity in the public sphere, and in particular in one little part of the public sphere, which is the commenting columns, as it were, or the commenting spaces on online publications. And we really wanted to test the proposition that the quality of the discourse improves if people are obliged to own their words, as it were. And we've done we have completed, or I don't know, analysing one very large-scale study where we looked at, we took 55,000 articles and the 44 million comments associated with them, and analysed them in relation to a switch between rules that would force people to be anonymous, or would force people to use their real identities, or their persistent identities at any rate. And we found there are significant differences. And that's quite, in that particular area, that's quite a useful finding. But it doesn't cope with the bigger problem, which is.
But if I may just interrupt that. But in general terms, the popular wisdom that anonymity leads to a decline in civility, and real name leads to more civility.
For this particular test, for this particular experiment, yes, and it was in a sense a kind of controlled experiment, because we were looking at the Huffington Post, which is a very large and influential online publication. And the Huffington Post very obligingly did a controlled experiment for us, because on a certain day in December 2013 they changed their policy. And we were able to gather a large number of articles before and after the switch, and then look at the difference. And the differences are, some of them are entirely predictable. One of them is that the volume of commenting goes down when anonymity is not permitted. Many kinds of topics more or less disappear. But the really interesting thing is that also some topics don't change much. They retain the same level of volume. And some of them are quite serious. Climate change is one, for example. And I think also gay marriage was another. So, and there's some slight measurable improvement in the quality of the discourse. But that's harder to do with automated methods, but that's the sort of impression we get. We're still working on the data, so we don't know for sure, but that's what we found.
What about persistent pseudonyms? That is to say, commenters who are identifiable, have a public profile over a period of time, but the name they are using is not the name on their passport.
Well, that highlights a useful point, which is that in public discourse we tend to think about anonymity as an on-off thing. It's either on or it's off. But in fact, it ought to be seen across the spectrum. That's why, for example, we think in terms of persistent identities. That may not be a real identity, but if it's one you use all the time for a particular purpose in a particular public space, then that's probably okay. But we need to recognise that this lies on a spectrum, and that there are some cases where anonymity is really, really valuable for free speech, for liberty, for combating repression and injustice, and it's really important. So it's not one of those things where you can treat it as a theological principle. And the problem with lots of this stuff in relation to the net is we do treat it, we talk about it in theological terms, and we ought to be talking about it in pragmatic terms.
Well, just last question, why is the debate so theological?
I think it's theological because, for reasons that are hard to understand, but something about the technology evokes in people theological responses. You may well remember, for example, an absolutely wonderful essay many years ago by Umberto Eco, in which he argued brilliantly that, and he was then talking about the theological dispute between those who believed in Apple computers and those who believed in the IBM PC. And he argued that the Apple, in fact, was a Catholic machine, because there was only one true way, and it was the one defined by Steve Jobs. Whereas the PC was a Protestant machine, because you had to find your own salvation. And I don't think much has changed.
Protestant or Catholic, John?
Oh, I've always been a Catholic.
John Naughton, thank you very much.